Je suis née à Papineauville. J'ai grandi dans l'Outaouais. J'ai étudié à Montréal. J'ai vécu à Québec et je suis venue m'installer à Ottawa. I had no idea. And that was a problem when I had to decide what am I going to study. And I went through a crazy process of elimination. I asked myself, what is it you would not learn by yourself? There's all kind of thing we can learn by ourselves. And I came to the conclusion that what I would be unable to learn by myself would be science, pure science. And that's why I decided to go in science. Mes grands-parents, mes parents, mais un attachement très particulier pour mes grands-parents maternels. Ma grand-mère était géniale. C'est une femme remarquable, d'une grande intelligence, d'une grande finesse. Elle savait tout faire et elle s'intéressait à tout. Elle lisait tout, elle avait des opinions, elle avait des idées, elle était joyeuse. Mon grand-père est un artisan. Je dirais peut-être un artiste, mais surtout un artisan. Il pouvait tout fabriquer de ses mains. Et tous les deux étaient d'une générosité remarquable. J'attendais avec impatience le moment où on allait passer les vacances d'été chez les grands-parents maternels. Well, my first degree is in science. So my brilliant reasoning at the time was that physics had been the domain that had transformed science in the 40s, 30s, 40s, the work of Einstein and many others. And my guess at the time was that the next scientific revolution was going to be biology, genetics, molecular biology, that would transform not only the physical world, but what it means to be human, the nature, the blending of nature and humanity. So I decided to go in biology, studying genetics and studying physiology and all these things. And I must admit, I had a great time. And I was all lined up to do my master and PhD, and I was going to make great discovery in bioengineering. I'm the generation of people who will, Students Association will take control of their campus in the 60s, and so I'm from that generation. Les occupations des années 68, les grandes manifestations, le Canada et le Québec, parce que je suis du Québec et je grandissais au Québec, étaient une zone fascinante. C'est une période de grands changements. C'est une génération qui, contrairement à ses parents, n'a pas vécu les effets des deux grandes guerres mondiales et qui n'a pas vécu le crash financier des années 20. Et donc, c'est une génération qui se sent plus libre et qui revendique plus de liberté, finalement. À juste titre ou non, c'est un autre débat, mais c'est une période fascinante, riche de changements politiques, sociologiques, économiques. Il y a plein de possibilités qui émergent, et donc c'est joyeux. Il y a un aspect dynamique et joyeux à cette période. Il y a un poète français qui dit « Si on n'est pas révolutionnaire à 20 ans, on n'a pas de cœur, et si on l'est encore à 50 ans, on n'a pas de tête. » Et donc, il y a un cheminement humain là-dedans. Est-ce que j'ai été de ceux qui revendiquaient? Oui. Est-ce que j'ai fait partie de l'occupation des cégep en 68? Oui. Est-ce que j'ai aidé à ma faculté à débrayer sur le campus de l'Université de Montréal? Oui. Est-ce que je faisais partie d'associations étudiantes? Oui. Et il y avait des idées se manifester, de cette richesse de débat, il y avait quelque chose d'absolument fascinant. Est-ce que c'est révolutionnaire? Non. Est-ce que c'est transformateur? Oui. Et il y a une immense différence. Well, next is a series of events. The first one was that summer, that very summer. I have my degree. I finished my bachelor. I'm going to my master in molecular biology. And that summer, I worked exactly in my field. So I could see in real life what it would be like if I was doing my master and my PhD. And through that summer, I kept watching the head of the lab. He was spending half of his time writing papers to get subsidies. He was spending a quarter of what was left managing the staff that was there. He was spending another fraction producing paper because you have two, and he had basically no time except at night to do the research he wanted to do. And that was enlightening. The second thing was that I discovered that it is lonely. And as much as I love the beauty of studying science, science is of great beauty intellectually, aesthetically, it is phenomenal. It's a world. Although I love the beauty of learning about it, it was not for me the solitude that comes with it in practice. Although science is a team sport, there's an aspect of solitude that was not for me. So I took a master's degree in management because it was giving me time to see how I wanted to reorient my thinking and my studies and so on. So I started a master's degree. Luck struck for the second time. So that summer, more than halfway through my master, I was recruited as a student by the Department of Transport of the Government of Canada. I knew nothing about the public sector. There has never been anybody in my family working in the private sector. I had no views, either positive or negative. I needed a job to fund my studies come September. So I came in and I was given a project and I was blown away. There are people who will spend their whole life searching for something they would feel passionate about. I found it by accident, and to this day am passionate about it. Passionate about governing, governance, public administration, the public service, the role of public sector leaders. It's my niche, it's my home. I was DG for Fisheries and Ocean for the Quebec region. When I went to Federal Provincial Relations Office, at the time Prime Minister Mulroney was there, and he had launched an annual cycle of First Ministers meeting on the economy. And FPRO needed to create a team to support the effort of the Prime Minister in that capacity. And at the same time, he decided to launch the Canada-US negotiation, so that was added to my portfolio as well. So I was combining an economic portfolio, annual economic conferences of First Ministers, and all the meetings of the First Ministers on Canada-US negotiations. The period under Prime Minister Mulroney was challenging in many ways and exciting and in even more ways. So you have to rewind the movie a bit. In the period preceding, Canada's fiscal situation has been consistently deteriorating. And of all the people in the country, those who knew most that that was unsustainable were the Canadian public servants. So they knew deeply that course correction was needed. Here comes a prime minister who had made a number of negative comments about the public service as an institution, but he came in and started to work with the public service right away. And he was a transformative leader. He wanted to achieve things that people around him were telling him can't be done, very risky, be careful. He had a very ambitious agenda. So the notion that he would call a meeting on the economy every year with all the premiers was breaking new grounds. My view of that small project that I had was that this Prime Minister single-handedly educated Canadians to the consequences of growing debt and deficit. And I have this vision of him in First Minister's meeting with chart in his hand and camera rolling, where he's educating Canadian about this is undermining future generations. And it's not because there was any support to trying to tackle the deficit. It's because he had decided that he was going to educate everybody and move them so that it would become possible. And he did that. I left FPRO after doing a number of annual meetings on the economy and having the joy of following what was happening with the Canada-US negotiation. And I decided to go to Energy, Mine and Resources on a lateral. I was in no rush to get promotion. I wanted to learn more. And that was a domain that had shifting policies, a shifting geopolitical landscape, one of the best deputy minister in town. So that was a really great school. So that was my next move. And it's after a number of years in that department that eventually the phone rang and Paul Tellier asked me, would you accept to be the Deputy Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs? And I think I lost my voice for a few seconds and I said, I would be honored. Tellier said, I knew we would get you one day. I was brought back from Consumer and Corporate Affairs to the center. Prime Minister Mulroney was now in the aftermath of Meach. Meach had not been successful, and the country was worse off than it was before. And something had to be done. So Tellier asked me to take over as Associate Secretary to the Cabinet now, the responsibility for the next chapter. And needless to say that I was not keen to leave my department, and I really thought that I was the wrong person to do that. So I argued and did not convince anybody. So I ended up being the Associate Secretary to Cabinet. Patrician had divided the country. It gave something and destroyed something. Meach was narrowly focused. It was a strategy which was, it's going to be successful. And therefore it did not truly envisage what are the consequences if it is not. And the consequences were severe. So from there you go into a different phase where Premier Bourassa is basically trying to buy time and allow the temperature to calm down. And Prime Minister Mulroney is doing the same thing. And one day, a statement is made by the Prime Minister in the House that at that time, at that date, Canada will table a proposal. And that triggered Charlottetown. So it triggered a very intense process of negotiations. At the table, you have 10 provinces, you have the territories, and 4 national Aboriginal associations. So you're dealing with 17 delegations looking for how to thread the needle, how to find the space where the water flows, where they could all be united. It is therefore quite broad in scope and extremely ambitious. The main characteristic of the Charlottetown Accord is institutional. It is redefining the role of the House of Commons to be very focused on representation by population. It is mind-boggling that it confirms that Quebec should never have less than 25% of the seats, in recognition that it has to protect a population in a North American continent. It is redefining the role of the Senate, which become elected and therefore powerful and equal, a true house of the provinces, and it's proposing a regime for self-government with the Aboriginal community that give them a status which is intermediate between the provinces and municipalities. So the main achievement of Charlottetown that we all have forgotten about is institutional reform. At the end of it, was it reasonable to expect that Canadians could absorb the content of that and make come to a judgment in 30 days in a referendum campaign? So at the end of the day, Canadians in their great wisdom decided that without knowing enough, the status quo had a better taste. And that's basically what happened when you look. Everybody's saying mildly no, but no one is rejected. So you don't have the drama of Meach, but it's 52, 53, 50, in that ballpark across the country. No one is rejected. And that is significant as well, I think. Prime Minister Mulroney did something which was quite unusual. After the negotiations of the Charlottetown Agreement, my job was to negotiate. Their job was to run a referendum. Once he came back home and it was lost, I remember I was tired, to be honest. And there's nothing I wanted more than, I want to go home. I want to spend time with my family. So I said, I'm taking a leave. Thank you, everybody. I'm gone. I found a job for my employees, downsized my team. When that was done, it was getting close to Christmas. I went home. In the new year, the Prime Minister called me and he said, what would you like to do when you grow up? And that's unusual. Prime Ministers do not normally ask Deputy Minister, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I need more stability. I want to be at home at night. I want to see my son grow up. So I want a job that, give me more flexibility than being on the road all the time. I mentioned CEDA, and the next thing I heard was the clerk moving me to CEDA. So I felt a huge amount of gratitude because it was a gift, an exceptional gift. Now, something he did not foresee, nor I, was that, well, he did foresee that he was leaving. He was stepping down and he was working hard to prepare the way for his successor. Prime Minister Campbell, came in office, worked with a new clerk till he had left, and they worked on a major reorganization that was launched in 1993. And as a result of that reorganization, I was moved out of CEDA and I was appointed to Transport. Now, that was a very tough moment because I thought it was disrespectful for the employees of CEDA. They had had a change of minister. They had lost their senior VP who had retired. They had just changed the deputy minister, and now out you go. There's a sense of loyalty that you owe to your team, There's loyalty to the institution, there's loyalty to the government of Canada, but there's a form of loyalty to your team. They trust you. And I felt it was disrespectful of the employees of CEDA. Honestly, I fell in love with MOT, so I never regretted working there, far from that. But the way it was done, to this day, is something that I think could have been done better. MOT was my last master class before becoming clerk. I didn't know, I had no idea, but it was a master class. MOT had too much of everything. The department was the owner, operator, regulator of all airports. Too much of a mandate, not enough capacity, and not enough resources. And the question that I kept asking is, what would happen If we were to reinvent the Department of Transport within the collective means of Canadians, what would it look like? What do we need to preserve from which we can build? And I started to work with the management team, and my minister was Minister Corbeil, the last year of the Conservative government. At the end of the year, we had collectively, my team, the management team, we had a view about what the department could be. But it was really bold. It was really bold and very different from what it was. In came a new government and a new minister, Minister Young. He's brave, he's courageous, he has political capital, and he's keen to do things. And we start again the same pieces, the same discussion, the same exploration. And we come to slightly similar conclusion. By and large, same conclusion, but each minister reflect their own political judgment of what would be defensible, what would be supported by public opinion. And we ended up with the most profound transformation plan for that department. Prime Minister Chrétien asked me to go to 24 Sussex. So that too is unusual. So you ask yourself, what could it be about? But at the time we're negotiating, there was the Pearson issue that he wanted not to be privatized, and the previous government wanted to privatize, and I was in the middle of that. So I thought, maybe I'm going to get a lecture about what I could have done better. But I thought we had done well, so I was not worried about that. Then I thought maybe there's something else, so we'll find out. So he asked me questions about the public service, about the DM community, about the strength. And I gave him a remarkable overview of the strength of the DM community, with special attention with the breadth of knowledge and expertise and deep savoir-faire and so on. Then it became a bit more focused about who could be clerk. And I came up with a long list of people who would do a great job. And then he said, what about you? And I said, I think you can do much better. I'm not breaking confidence because he joked publicly about it. Otherwise, I would not bring that back. The clerk support the Prime Minister as an institution. And the Prime Minister has exclusive prerogative in some domain, but the primary role is to make sure that you're connecting with the Prime Minister as the head of the executive to make sure that the agenda that is being shaped is fed and brought back to the public service so that you have alignment. You align a political leader in a governing system with the capacity of the professional public service in real time. And therefore, you're connecting these two every day. The Secretary to the Cabinet is different. The real authority of the Prime Minister is to be the chair of a cabinet system of government. And the authority is with ministers. And therefore, the Secretary to the Cabinet helps the Prime Minister as chair, but is this at the service of the Cabinet as a whole. And the key ingredient in a cabinet system of government is ministers who understand what it is to be ministers and are able and willing to exercise their authority to the fullest. So there are days where you're defending ministers in the relationship with the Prime Minister. There are days where you're defending the chair of the cabinet system in aligning the contribution of ministers. You're the secretary to a cabinet system. We knew that there was a need to eliminate the deficit, and we knew that it was going to be a profound transformation of the public sector. We had proposed an approach. The Prime Minister had agreed. That was allowing every department to bring their most courageous ideas. As we saw the package being shaped, we knew how profound it would be. That was going to affect tens of thousands of employees directly and everybody else indirectly. And there was a danger that in the process you would undermine the institutional capacity. So I triggered at the same time the yin and the yang. We're going to look at how do we reposition the Government of Canada, and at the same time, how do we rethink the public service? So that by bringing attention to how do we rethink the public service, I was trying to prevent damage to the core functions. So 2 of the task forces were about service delivery. At the end of the day, it's about serving Canadians. But Canadians were expecting different way of serving than what had been the traditional approach. Horizontal service delivery, integrated service delivery, single window, technologically supported service delivery, service online, service on their terms as opposed to the delivery agency. 2 groups looked at that. One or two groups look at the policy capacity. One of the danger of all the cuts that were taking place is that departments could be inclined to cut where it's easy. And it could be easy to cut your research capacity, which is your lifeline as a professional, non-partisan public organization. So one task force was looking at how good are we? What is the state of our policy capacity? Are we falling behind? What do we need to build, and so on? And another one was looking at what about horizontal policy making, so that we knew that an increasing number of complex issues could not be addressed by working in silo in one department. You need to work through shared knowledge across a number of organizations to shape viable solutions. So we triggered these 2. So 2 on service and 2 on policy. Everybody in the public service and people in senior positions have a duty to leave behind better institutions than the one we've inherited. So we inherit what we have, and we start from where we are. But the duty is to leave it better than it was. I was acutely aware that I had benefited as I grew through the rank in the public service of a diversity of experience. I had been in staff position and managing line operation. I had worked in headquarters and in the regions. I had done policy work and service delivery and central agencies. And the sum of that is rounding the experience of a senior public sector leader. And I thought it was an asset. And if we could help people acquire a diversity of experience as they grew, they would be better off as senior public sector leaders. That was one assumption. Another assumption was that there had been so many years of downsizing and cuts and freeze that some of the people moving up, growing up, had been deprived of the opportunity of competing for position, getting to more senior level, and getting the diversity of knowledge and experience I'm talking about. So on one hand, I was aware of the benefit of diversity. On the other hand, I was aware that we had deprived people of the number of opportunity for growth, personal growth. I always find that there's a risk of confusion between management and leadership. And allow me to disentangle that, because it's hard to answer one if you've not positioned the other one. Managers have authority for a purpose. So managers should be able to manage. They should know the extent of their authority, and they should be prepared to use it to its limit. So management and the exercise of authority is one thing. Leadership is something else. Leadership gets you where authority cannot. And leadership is not related to your seniority in the organization. Leadership is the power of ideas that mobilize others in moving with you in tandem in a converging way to achieve something that you judge to be better than what existed before. And therefore, it's a collective sport. It's not, I have authority. It's a collective sport that align knowledge, know-how, capabilities to a purpose. And that can only be celebrated as a team effort. So the distinction between the two is significant in my mind, because by confusing the two, we lose both. You know, one of the most powerful questions public sector leaders can ask of their team is, how does it all fit together? The magic is not in the pieces. The magic is in the weaving, the knitting of many pieces that amount to a different way of thinking, a different view of the future, a different possibility, a different way forward. So the coming together of the deep knowledge and the broad perspective is when you come up with an ambitious transformative agenda. I've always been a student of public administration. Remember when I mentioned that I was recruited as a student, and what I discovered was not the precise job I was doing. I discovered public service. I discovered that government make a difference. And as my career progressed, what has always been so exciting for me is the deeper and deeper awareness that there are no well-performing country without a well-performing state, without well-performing government, without well-performing public institutions. And therefore, I have always been a student of what does it mean to govern? What does it mean to serve? What do we have to do so that Canada is going to be among the countries that will successfully navigate through an unprecedented period of change? That is exciting. So I've always been a student of public administration and governance, but the learning is in the doing. And when I left the public service, I had a concern of losing or missing the learning from the doing. And therefore, I invented a way to stay in touch with practitioners. And that's where I launched the new Synthesis Initiative, which is an international research network, by and large, of practitioners in a diversity of country. And we meet and exchange and debate and work together for the same purpose, which is, what do I have to do in my respective country so that my country is going to be among the few that will successfully navigate through an unprecedented period of change? So I'm a practitioner and proud to be. I'm a learner of public administration and proud to be. They are different. So let me go to what are some, taking a long view, what are some of the changes that I may consider striking or significant. One, there is a transformation, and I would say the risk of erosion of the role of ministers. In our system of cabinet government and parliamentary democracy, the authority rests with ministers. Not the power, maybe, but the authority. And anything that erodes the responsibility of a minister undermines the system in some ways, our democratic system. So I think we have to think about what can we do to re-enable the role of minister to the fullest. It makes for better democracy and more check and more creativity. A second trend that I find significant is that we have in Canada, in the making, layers between elected official and the professional public service. They are not necessarily partisan, but politically aligned. And that buffer, that zone in between, is operating in a space of unaccountability. They are neither elected nor accountable as a professional public servant is held to so many multiple check and balances. So you have dangerous layers of unaccountability. It used to be very small and therefore probably not significant, but it is growing fast. And as it is growing, we have to ask ourselves, How does it fit in? And if it is going to continue to grow, then we need to design a system that builds the accountability for that tranche as well. If it is circumstantial, then we need to go to different conclusions. But those are significant trends. There are others, but not of the same kind. Those two are institutional. You join the public service today, and therefore you bring skills that were not there before. And you bring a view of the world that was not there before. And you will be the architect of a profound realignment. You will have to think about how do we bring together economic prosperity, social solidarity, and the capacity to preserve the life-staying power of the planet. Not one or the other working in isolation. You will have to be the architect of how they come together in all aspects of the work of government in society. You will have to invent ways of steering Canada through a profound technological transformation without being naive and without pretending that you want to become the expert in any one of these techniques. You have to be the philosopher of technological changes, because each one will present phenomenal opportunity and phenomenal risk for humanity. Whether it is AI, whether it is bioengineering or geoengineering, which is probably the next one that is going to hit the planet in very dangerous ways. So you have to be the philosopher of how a country benefits from the multiplying effect of multiple technological transformation in a way that optimizes your benefits and minimizes the management of your risk. It is not going to be in the micro of these techniques. It is about the thinking of their phenomenal transformational capacity. So you will be the generation that will lead to multiple recalibration and redefinition of the role of the state. This is a great time. This is a great time. You will have to reconnect freedom, liberties, humanities, and prosperities in new ways. So I'd love to be a student joining the public service today. And if I can be your partner, count me in.